This is Naomi Cunningham, who is the gender critical movement's main legal person. She is involved in she must be raking in the money. She is involved in every single gender critical legal case. But she's not an she might also be an opportunist, I don't know. She's not an opportunist grifter type. She is a true believer. I have to be very careful here because I live in the UK and so does she, but she is definitely a true believer in the full scope of gender critical ideology. She is doing this out of her raw feelings about trans people. And I'm sure her getting very rich off this is also beneficial for her too, but she's a true believer. Anyway, she is the lawyer. She's been the lawyer in every single gender critical case at the moment. She was involved in the Supreme Court ruling as far as I understand, but she was also the lawyer for Sandy Peggy, who is the nurse who we've been talking about, who is currently going for a tribunal at the moment because she didn't want to be around a trans colleague and who has been exposed saying racist slurs. Naomi Cunningham is, in one sense, very clever because she is forcing these gender critical arguments into UK law via the courtrooms and has managed to get, in the Supreme Court ruling, and managed to get them to rule that trans people don't have human rights they used to have, and that biological sex is a binary, but without them defining it. It was very clever of her to get into law. Sex is based on biology, but also we're not going to attempt to define that. They've smoothed over the problem in the big hole in gender critical ideology, which is they don't have a binary and immutable definition of sex, by literally just being okay, we won't deal with that. So in that sense, she's quite clever, and obviously she's managed to maneuver herself into this position, and obviously she's a lawyer, and you need to have some level of intelligence to be a lawyer. But also, she is constrained by her ideology and the reality of the gender critical movement, where she has to make these incredibly stupid arguments, very trivially dumb. And this is why I kind of hate law as a thing, because she is here making these terrible, embarrassing, fucking stupid arguments in front of a judge who hasn't thought about this stuff before. And rather than us relying on this being a public discussion where she presents an idea and then everyone points out it's stupid, they're in this closed room where only a limited number of people are allowed to be there, and only certain people are allowed to say certain things at certain times. And if the person who's there to push back against her arguments is an idiot, then her arguments just go through. And I've got two examples here, the second one being more stupid than the first, of just things that I've seen that she said. She said a whole bunch of stuff, and lots of it is just fucking ridiculous. But here is a couple of examples. So here she is trying to argue about binaries, and she picks, there's a whole bunch of stuff you could pick to give an example of a binary. Ideally, you would pick maths, because that is the only place that real binaries really exist. You could have a drawing of a load of squares and triangles, and you can say this is a binary data set because you're either a square or a triangle, and there is no alternatives. There's nothing that doesn't fall into one of those two groups, so therefore it's a true binary. You could also do it in philosophy. You could a classic philosophical example is you're either a bachelor or you're not a bachelor. You can't be both of those things at the same time, and you go through a process where you go from being one to another, and there's a specific point where that happens. But the problem is, outside of philosophy and maths, binaries don't really exist. And she is trying to argue that sex is a binary, and in order to describe sex as a binary, what has she chosen? She has chosen alive or dead. And obviously, most people, when you think of alive or dead, you do think it's kind of a binary, because you're either alive or you're dead. I think to the lay person who's never really engaged with biology before or thought about this in much detail or has never had a loved one in an intermediate state, they'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, of course this is a binary. So it's just down to whether the judge has realized this or not. But here's an example of her setting up her own argument and then knocking it down without any intervention. She says, she is asking the doctor to think of the binary of alive or dead. She says, we can say with certainty that everyone in this room is alive and everyone stored in a refrigerator in the mortuary is dead. Kind of a bad, I mean, on its own, this is a bad argument because that's just two examples. Like, you could say everything here is a square and everything here is a triangle, but that doesn't mean that circles don't exist. But anyway, okay. She then says, this is a socially and clinically salient point. She said, you don't invite dead people to dinner or challenge them to a game of tennis, and you wouldn't treat them or ask them their symptoms. That's all true, despite the fact we could treat this tribunal to many days of fascinating learned evidence on how to point to the moment of death and what is meant by death. Okay, approaching the issue of your argument. The doctor said death is determined clinically, by which I mean not using complicated investigation. It's made by checking the pulse, checking for signs of life for a period of time to make a diagnosis of death. We know from watching death in the ICU that there may still be electrical activity in the heart after clinically diagnosing death, so it is a binary state, but the definition of what exactly death is not that clear. And she says, the existence of rare edge cases does not alter the fact that in all other cases it is binary and it matters. So, you just set up alive or dead is a binary, and then like very shortly afterwards you say there are actually very rare edge cases that don't alter the fact that in all other cases, yes, okay, well, every single thing in existence that has more than one state is a binary if you ignore all the cases that don't fit into the binary. Dogs and cats are a binary if you ignore all other animals and any kind of hybrid. Like, that is such a stupid and ridiculous argument. It's just so trivially false. It actually happens that, like, this person says that, like, what actually death is not that clear. They say it's a binary state. I mean, it isn't. That just isn't true. It isn't a binary state. When do you draw the line when someone is dead? For sure, if their brain and heart and nerves and stuff have all stopped doing activity, they are dead. And if someone is moving around and talking to you and engaging with you in conversation and stuff, they're probably alive. But there are cases in the middle where it just isn't clear. If someone has like a stroke in their brain and their heart is still beating and they're even still responding to like light being shone in their eyes and hitting their nerves and stuff, and to temperature and things like that, but they can't interact with you, or they're not like awake or anything ever. Are they alive or dead? You can even get like more grey area examples of that where like someone's heart could stop beating for some time and then maybe start again. And did they die and then come back alive? Or were they just not dead? They just had their heart stopped for a while. There isn't a clear example. And when you go away from like super complicated big organisms like humans, and you go to some other animals and plants and other living things, there are some things that can be like, for example, tardigrades can be dehydrated and frozen and fired with radiation and stuff to the point where they're just like a lifeless husk for decades, and they have no processes going on inside them at all. And then when you rehydrate them and put them up to a normal temperature, they like come back alive. Are they coming back alive, or were they never dead in the first place? Like this doctor says, what the definition of death isn't actually clear. And whenever you have something where you have like two states and you're not actually sure where to draw the line, it's very unlikely that's a binary. I mean, theoretically, it could be that you've just not discovered where the line is. But in reality, when it comes to something like alive or dead, it's subjective, like it's inherently subjective. And even if we knew everything about it, we wouldn't necessarily be able to say it, because it's not a binary from A to B instantaneous transition. It's often, in most cases, a fairly quick change from one thing to another, but not always. So why would you pick alive and dead as your example if you're then going to straight away admit that there are other cases? Anyway, that's a classic gender critical argument. And what I think is worth pointing out is Naomi Cunningham is like the top gender critical mind, one of them. Again, like it's like Helen Joyce and whatever. This isn't random rank and file gender criticals coming out with some stupid thing they read on Reddit. This is the top gender critical minds in the country coming out with some stupid thing they read on Reddit. Like these are like, as we were talking about earlier about this person who said trans people have never engaged with what gender critical people believe. We have. And the thing is that the stupid, idiotic things you read on Twitter literally are their belief system, and they'll go and say them in court. And like, even worse than this, later on, Mrs. Cunningham is then asking about neovagina. So this is written by the Scotsman, unfortunate description, but they say, asking about neovaginas, a surgical cavity made with skin from a penis or colon, which can be surgically created on a trans woman. So just so we know, there is vaginectomy. No, that's removing vaginoplasty, which is where the process of surgically creating a vagina isn't only for trans women. It is also for some cis women. There is at least one technique available to trans women. PPT. I can't remember what it stands for. Perineal pull through, something like that. There is at least one technique of vaginoplasty for trans women, which was originally created on cis women who are born without vaginas, who want to have a vagina, and it's the same technique, and it means that theoretically someone could have both a vagina and a penis at the same time, because they don't need to use the tissue from the like penis and other parts of those organs in creating the vagina. And I know there is at least one example, of a trans person who does have that, because I was reading about their story, but there could be others, I don't know. But there are multiple procedures available to create vaginas in people, and some of them do use the tissue from penis and or colon and or other parts of organs of people. Also, they can use the skin from your leg for things, and etc. But importantly, at least some of those techniques are available for trans women and cis women. Anyway, she said this is one of the top legal mind, one of the main core arguers of the gender critical movement in an important court case which could decide the future of our human rights. And she says that it is obviously not a vagina because, and this is her reasoning, this is her top gender critical argument as to why a trans woman's vagina is not a real vagina, is because any sperm ejaculated into such a cavity would find itself in a dead end with no egg to fertilize. This doctor agrees. I mean, maybe I'm just too close to the ground on this and I've spent too long thinking about these things. But to me, when I read this, it was like 0.01 seconds before my mind created a list of counterexamples to this. Okay, so maybe it's not obvious to you. Let's go through them. So does that mean that cis women who were born with vaginas but without a cervix or uterus, which is a thing that some people are born with, do not have vaginas, does it mean that women who have had hysterectomies where the uterus has been removed, no, even though they still have a vagina, in my world, in their world, in the world of reality, does that mean that Naomi Cunningham thinks they don't have vaginas now because sperm don't have anywhere to go? Why is sperm being ejaculated into a cavity the core definition of a vagina here? Anyway, there are plenty of women who never have sex with men. For example, lots, but not all, lesbians. And like we've put an egg to fertilize in here. Does that mean women who are born with vaginas and uteruses, but with no ovaries or just no fertile eggs or no eggs at all, does that mean they don't have vaginas, even though they've got the entire reproductive system there? No, all of this is fucking stupid. It's absolutely idiotic. Like, there are so many trivial, instant counterexamples that you would just come up with off the top of your head here. That is just like, this is her reasoning as to why trans women's vaginas aren't real vaginas. And instantly it includes a huge number of cis women. Like, possibly millions of cis women are included in this definition of someone who cannot have a real vagina. Which is just crazy, like absolutely crazy. Like, how is this the top arguer in the gender critical world? And how is this being presented in court? And how is this a position where we have these ignorant and or corrupt and or like bigoted and or stupid judges where they're making these decisions based on this person's argument, and they're not just like, what? Like, my mum's had a hysterectomy. My friend was born without a uterus. Two of my friends are lesbians, actually. Like, how is this it? Like, this is the problem. Like, this you see the same as this when you first start going up against creationists or something in like skeptic or atheist world. You think, oh, you hear all these big names and you think, God, these people, like, you know, they've dedicated their life to this, the top level apologists, they probably outclassed me, and then you see their arguments and you're like you've been so trained when you like in the sort of atheist skeptic world, you're so trained to be on the lookout for straw manning, and you should always steel man your opponent's arguments, and you should always try and, you know, oh, they've misspoken here. Let's not just attack what they've slipped up and said the wrong word here. Let's assume they've said the correct word and trying to approach the best part of their argument, because you can see them doing it to us and you're like, this is bullshit. They've not addressed my argument at all. They've just focused on the fact that I said the wrong word or something. And then when you go in and you steel man the best people's best arguments, and you're like, oh, this is just stupid. This is like idiotic. I mean, that's because the position is idiotic and there's no argument you can construct which, like, is better than this. There are no good creationist arguments because it's a stupid position. And it's the same here. There are no good gender critical arguments. There is no good argument as to why trans women's vaginas aren't real. Like, they're always going to come up with something stupid like this, and trivially stupid. Because, I mean, the thing they're arguing for is stupid. So yeah, it's just unbelievable that someone like this is their best mind and is genuinely has more power than I will ever have, and is making a real difference and taking away real people's rights based on arguments this fucking stupid. And this is why they should always have like real experts involved in these cases. They've got a doctor here, this Dr. Currer or whatever, who just agrees with this bullshit, so he's obviously an idiot too. Like, I hate this kind of, I don't believe it's possible to change your chromosomes or karyotype. I do believe, good type in there, karyotype, spelt that wrong. Anyway, steel manning their position. I don't believe it's possible to change your chromosomes or karyotype. I do believe it's possible to change your expression of gender. Okay, cool, but there's a whole load of stuff in the middle of that, which is actually, like, you dodged around the important... No one gives a fucking shit about your chromosomes because they don't affect your life. And it doesn't matter what your gender expression here is if we're talking about biology. What does matter is all the parts of your sex which you can and do change through medical transition. For example, genitals, gonads, hormones, all kinds of other things that lead on from changing hormones. And then she said, Mrs. Cunningham also says it's nonsense to suggest a man gaining female chromosomes because of a bone marrow transplant means he's changed his sex. Yes, that's because your chromosomes aren't actually the most important part of your sex, but they are one of the parts of your sex. And if your chromosomes do change because of a bone marrow transplant or whatever, I'm not sure if that's possible to change the majority of your chromosomes via bone marrow transplant, but at least some of them could change. If they do change, that doesn't mean your whole sex has changed. If you have a cis man and all you do is change their chromosomes, nothing about their life is going to change. It's not going to affect their hormones, which is like the most important part of their sex, because that leads on to so many other things which are downstream from hormones. So yes, it is nonsense to suggest that changing your chromosomes would change your sex on their own, because they are not an important part of your sex, but they are one of the parts, and they would have changed. And if someone says, here is two men, and they're identical, apart from one of them's chromosomes changed from a bone marrow transplant, or some number of the cells in their body's chromosomes are now different to what they used to be, these two men's sexes are different. That's not to say they're in totally different boxes and one of them is no longer male. What I'm saying is sex is a combination of a whole bunch of properties which do have effects on how your life works, and particularly when it comes to like medicine and stuff. And these two men are different. They're different for when it comes to human rights or social interactions or sexuality in a completely negligible way, which doesn't affect their lives at all. But when it comes to rare chromosomal conditions which may or may not affect you in later life, there aren't many, but there are some, it may affect them. And some of those could be sexually dimorphic conditions or ones that only affect certain sex, and in which case they will only affect one of them, if it's specifically on those chromosomes that the bone marrow affects, whatever. So yeah, no, a bone marrow transplant cannot change someone's sex. I mean, it can't change you from like male to female because the definition of sex is not just chromosomes. But it can change. I don't actually know that bone marrow transplant can change someone's chromosomes. Maybe, maybe not. I'll have to do some more research into that specific claim. But whether it can or not doesn't really matter for this, because if we just accept that as true, we just steel man this position and say that it can, that doesn't change someone's whole sex, because their whole sex is not just their chromosomes. Like, how else more clearly can I explain this? Maybe I'm not doing a good job of explaining it, but this does seem just very obvious to me, but maybe that's because I've thought about it loads. But it's like, if you have something which has multiple properties defining it, if you just change one of them, that doesn't mean the whole thing has changed. It just means one of those properties has changed. Sex is made up of lots of different properties. If you just change one of them, that doesn't mean the whole sex has changed. It doesn't mean it's gone from group A to group B. It just means that property has changed. But if you keep changing all the properties, then eventually the whole the way of describing the whole thing will change enough that it makes more sense for it to be in a different category than the one it originally started in. I feel like I have to draw diagrams for this. I'm going to do a video where I draw diagrams for this for sure. But yeah, I just want to highlight that you need to know who Naomi Cunningham is, because she is a major player in the British gender critical movement, and you need to know she's just as fucking ridiculous as the rest of them, and they do not have any better arguments than this, and this is literally the peak of their arguments, and they are stupid.